This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Robert, Kathryn, and I are talking about pre-writing, and this is going to be one of our library episodes. So if you go to the show notes at storyworkspodcast.com and scroll down, we'll have a slider where you can just check out and pop over to all of the related episodes. So pre-writing, Robert, since you've been away from the mic for a few weeks, I'm going to let you bring us into the topic.
Yeah, well, you do get a bit more time in prison to make some notes and things. So, it's good to be out again.
Welcome back.
I'm joking. Yeah, it feels like ages. I have been writing, and pre-writing for me, I think, is more like a sort of notation style. Occasionally a line of dialogue will come out. I think that's because I'm one of those writers who tends to think in dialogue. I think for the most part anyway. But I don't do it as a warm-up, and I'm thinking it through. That's probably not a bad idea, because I think one of the things that terrifies me about putting my butt in the chair to write scenes is that you start so cold. And then I end up reading back in the previous scene, and then you get sort of all trapped in the editing mind. Whereas pre-writing would kind of fire up the creative drafting mind, perhaps. So I have done the trick of, leaving notes or partially writing the next scene before I finish, and then coming back to that the next day, and that definitely feels good. To do that, because it's a form of pre-writing, I suppose. But I don't do, unlike both of you, I don't do any journaling or anything like that. My freelance work for writing book descriptions is so full on that that is my writing outside of writing, if you like. So I do find myself pretty exhausted for getting into a mindset. But I think, that this year, that's something that needs to change. And if that's what you mean by pre-writing, but I'm curious to hear for both of you what pre-writing means to you.
I was thinking of pre-writing as in preparation before I start a book, but I actually love what you said, because it made me realize, there's also the pre-writing we can do to get us into our writing space on a daily basis, or when we're stuck. I definitely go back to my pre-writing practice with the journal whenever I get stuck, no matter where I'm at in the manuscript. So, yeah, interesting. Kathryn, tell us about pre-writing.
Tell us about pre-writing. Yeah, no, it was funny because I had the same kind of thing going on, Alida, where I was like pre-writing, like prepping for writing, right? But then, I probably do have a fairly even split between doing it all before drafting and doing it in the middle of drafting, and getting myself back into things by reworking into what does the scene need to be in more of a, outliney, conversational with myself way before I start writing the scene. So, yeah. Sorry, interruption from Peanut Gallery over there. But yeah, I think I probably don't do as much figuring things out beforehand as I should, like before I sit down to my first draft. So my pre-writing tends to happen in the middle of drafting too. So I'll get to a point and then say, okay, what comes next? And then I'll have to work my way through before I can start writing either the next scene or the next chapter, etc.
I have heard from a writer who will, she was reading the pages she wrote that day before going to bed every night, and then starting her writing process the next morning with her subconscious mind having done some of her pre-writing work for her while she slept.
Yeah. How did she fall asleep? That's my question. Whenever I write right before I go to bed, I end up like sitting there for like an hour, laying there, just playing things in my head. So
I don't know, but I haven't tried it. It's one of those things where I'm like, oh, what a great idea. I should totally do that. But then at bedtime, I don't have my writing with me. I just, it's like I would have to set it up and make it a new habit. And I've already got bedtime habits, but I do think it's a great idea. And then another writer opens every day by revising the previous day's pages so he can spend hours in revision before he even starts to write, which is something else I haven't done, but I think is a great idea because we do sometimes need to like grease the wheels to get back into the voice of the piece and to get back into the storyline. Have you two ever employed techniques like that in your drafting process?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's quite common to go back and read the chapter or two before, or a few scenes before. If you've had a little bit of a break, obviously, that's usually key to it anyway. But as you say, Alida, to get that feel for the voice and the tone, particularly, I think, our states change throughout the day. So, depending on all sorts of things, if you've just eaten or if you just listen to some rousing music or some depressing music, or stuff happens in your life and you're writing and it's infusing. And so there have been times where I've been editing and I've gone from one scene to another, which is kind of shocking. What's happened here? It's probably, I must have just had an argument with somebody or something because this character is all snarky all of a sudden. So yeah, I guess that's a form of pre-writing in your head. Well, if you're doing editing, of course, it's writing. And I've done lots of different forms of this. I have done the rereading as well. Again, this has probably been more to do with breaks for me. I think when I'm full on in a draft, it does tend to sit well in my head, and whether I've read the last few bit or not, I'm often dreaming about it anyway. But I don't know if I've ever specifically set that up. I'm curious about the pre-writing, which we can come back to, because about the pre-writing before the story even. So that you mentioned, Alida, that would be interesting to me as well. But in terms of keeping current with, yes, I've found many different ways to keep current. I've got this for current work in progress. I'm holding up a sheet of middle scenes to write where I've got pretty extensive notes, pages and pages of notes. But, and some of it is because some of the work has already been done. Some of it is just some bullet pointy stuff. So that's a form of pre-writing. It's not an outline. It's just some markers to follow.
Right. Yes. And I think like you, I feel comfortable just dropping back into my story and the voice is there if I'm in it, if I haven't had a break, so I hear these other things and I'm like, oh, that's a really good idea, but maybe I don't need it until I need it, know? So I don't know. And I do, like you showed there with the notes, I just, typing up my work in progress, I found like a bunch of my pages are basically a storyboard, just going through the scenes of that section and creating those notes for me of where it's going and what I need to do. And then I seldom go back and look at them, but they're there. Like the process of writing them down seems to get them where they need to be in my mind.
Definitely. I think for me, that's one of the most powerful things about whatever we're calling pre-writing, is the fact that you unwind stuff in your head. And sometimes, fabulous new things come up. I guess it's a form of pantsing maybe in some way, in very short bursts where you're sort of trying to tap back into your creative mind to get that flow going.
Yeah, it's the discovery, right?
Yeah.
So that's where all your ideas form, and then you can move on from there.
Yes, sometimes I've looked at my journals at the discovery writing and gone, Oh, that was a good idea. I didn't use that. Maybe I should have used that. That was really good, but
Well,
it
that
didn't
was
make it into the
genius.
book because while I was writing, that was over there in the journal
Mhm.
and I wasn't actually tracking it. So it's curious. Sometimes we'll just say a non-judgmental, curious how much I stray and when I need to come back and what gets left in the notebook that never makes it into the book that maybe should if I was more of a consistent, using it consistently as a reference point. Um, Maybe something good would come of that I miss out on. But, I don't know. I think if I need it, it's in my brain.
Yeah. We have to go woo-woo on this one and say you just got to trust the universe is putting on the words on the paper that you need. It's. I was thinking because Kathryn was talking earlier about before we started recording about the Picasso thing. So I'll come back to that. But when you were talking about pre-writing before a story even starts, I've other than sort of outlining and jotting down notes, which I suppose are technically pre-writing to some degree, what is it that you do then that is a kind of enabling thing?
It always starts with the journal, just getting the idea down. And then if it's a good idea, if it sticks, I keep spinning it out. More comes to me, more layers sort of evolve. So whatever the starting point is, I get curious enough that maybe I do a little research or maybe I start writing out scenarios. I don't get into scenes and dialogue and stuff until I have a fuller picture,
Okay.
And I'm not sure at what point the picture is full enough to start creating scenarios, but it's just sort of riffing on paper. It's a playground, if I have this, then what about that? Trying to think if there's an example. I mean, I know I've talked about Saving Annabelle before, so hopefully it's not tedious, but and if someone's curious, they can refer back to the reading series episode 1, where I read some of Saving Annabelle, but it started with an image of a girl in a bathtub being bathed by her sister, and she was missing some fingers on her hand. So when the washcloth came out, her arm to the hand, there were a couple of fingers missing. And I don't know where that came from, but I was like, oh, what happened? Who's she? What is this all about? Who's the sister? And so, originally, because of what I saw of the bathtub and the bathroom, I was thinking like 1920s or something. But as the story developed, I wound the clock backwards and made it Victorian because I wanted it more isolated without automobiles, less development in the community where they were and such. And so even in the very early stages, when I'm just spinning out ideas, I'm already making choices about the structure and what the story is demanding and how many people I need to interact with these two girls who showed up in that original picture in my mind.
I like this idea. I'm doing it in a way. So what you're doing is it sounds as if, anyway, I'm not telling you what you're doing. It sounds as if you're finding ways into a story from whatever angle it might be, whether it was a flash of an image or whether it was an idea for a character or a setting, it doesn't really matter. But what I really like is you found an emotional point in there. You go, oh, what happens? Why are those fingers missing? We've got to the point of intrigue or excitement or anxiety or fear or some things. And I think that's probably one of the keys to pre-writing is to find what is the emotional layer that's supporting it, because otherwise we might end up with something that sounds like a neat premise, but doesn't lead anywhere. So, what if we had this giant spaceship that was found in the middle of nowhere? Okay, but, how does that impact us as a reader? What is it that's going to stir in me? And that's very different to the foreshadowing that happens when, you know, we're bathing somebody's arm and getting down to the end of it and there are missing fingers. You know, there's an immediate question in there, which is very personal. So I like the idea of pre-writing to find what are the emotional turning points, because I think it's much easier to construct scenes around emotional turning point. That's what a scene should be anyway. So, you know, I do like that idea of pre-writing.
Are you ready to take your storycraft to the next level? Storyworks Fiction Online School has courses available right now, from micro courses on character traits to master level workshops on plot and building characters. There are also live workshops with your instructor in the classroom with you every week, guiding your progress and workshopping your manuscripts along the way. All students enrolled in Storyworks Fiction, whether active in a class or not, can take advantage of the monthly free live Q&A calls with Alida. Check out storyworksfiction.com today and take your storycraft to the next level.
Because I think mine is much more structured. It's more of, okay, I've got to get from this plot point to this plot point, you know, typical kind of, you know, thinker man. Right. So I like that idea. I'll have to try that when I come to these scenes that I've got here that I was just holding up. I'll have to have a look and see if I've actually managed to make anything vaguely emotional in there. It'd be helpful.
Yeah. And one of the things that I have to do is I have to figure out what the story is, because the story wasn't about the missing fingers or even how she wound up missing fingers. That happens very early in the book. And so the story is so much bigger than that. And the girl in the tub is not the protagonist, it's the sister. And the vision didn't tell me any of those things, you know, so that was all part of the exploratory writing. Who's got the voice of the story and what is it about? So before I knew what it was really about, I think I had to start building an idea of the family that, you know, is that surrounds my protagonist, and figure out the role of the isolation and, you know, the meaning of the time frame and those things before I even knew where the loss of the fingers fit into the story and what that meant.
Yeah, there's freedom in this, isn't there? You know, you're not sort of already constrained by a story. It's formative. I mean, and this goes exactly to what I was just saying while Kathryn was off camera, that before we started recording, Kathryn was talking about, you know, famous artists and studies that they do, you know, where you walk into a room and they've got 100 sketches of similar ideas. And I think it's, from a visual artist point of view, it's easy to consume that when there's been a famous artist that had that, because they're often preserved. But for us, you know, they'd be sitting on a hard drive somewhere or in a notebook or something. So I wonder how many of us do have, you know, vast stores of words that were effectively studies, and how useful it is indeed to have that sort of thing. I mean, what you've just been talking about in finding the way into this particular story is a way of doing that, and it's probably not a bad idea if one is struggling with a story to say, okay, I'm just going to treat my next few days as some studies, in the same way that Picasso would make studies. And it doesn't matter if none of them reach it to the final product, because none of Picasso's did either. But they're, as someone consuming art, they're fascinating to see, because they give you an insight into you know, his process. So, yes. I don't know, Kathryn, did you have any comments that you wanted to actually make about that? Because it was quite interesting. You know, I know it was a while ago that you did this, but it struck me, having also been to Picasso museums in France.
Yeah, it was just really cool for me walking through that to see that, like it's so easy to think that the artist just walks up to the giant blank canvas and says, this is the idea, here I go. And, layer upon layer upon layer, it comes into being, and to see, the hundreds of drawings that came before it, where he's twisting things and making things just so. And it kind of reminded me of like, as a writer, right? Here we go. All of the different sketches, right? And I think as I was listening to you guys talk, pre-writing for me is finding the story that you want to tell, right? And oftentimes you aren't really sure of exactly the story that you're telling until you get, knee deep, or maybe chest deep. I don't know. It depends on who you are, right? But, hopefully that pre-writing stage gives you all the sketches, all the early drafts, all of the, the ideas that come together to form what you're hoping is a very, maybe not beautiful might be the wrong word, piece of art, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, those are some of the most fun writing days for me because of the discovery process, because of what's revealing itself to me as I play in my notebook. And if I'm drafting and I've got a scene, I know I need to craft a certain way to get to a certain goal. That's its own kind of pleasure, but it isn't free form. It isn't a playground the way pre-writing is.
Yeah, I suppose it's a form of daytime dreaming, isn't it? Really, in some kind of description, and tapping into that extraordinary thing that none of us know what it really is. The collective id, the superconscious, the channeling. Who knows? But the weird place that art comes from, which it can be hard to find if you're intent on. And I spoke about this earlier on. We do talk a lot about craft and the very specific tools of craft, in the same way that you could ask Picasso to come in and talk to us about the difference between charcoals, pencils, brushes, oils, watercolors. But that's not art. That's the mechanisms. And we can confuse mechanisms with the art itself. So I think pre-writing feels to me like it's much closer to the art of what it is we're trying to replicate on the page, that then somehow translates into a vicarious experience for a reader.
Mm-hmm.
I've shut everybody up now.
Just thinking, what can I say that can follow that? Yes, play, be creative, open your notebooks and get your charcoals and your brushes out and dabble, go for it. Writing, it shouldn't always be like, here's my outline, here's my target, I'm writing the scene, I'm hitting that mark. Because that takes some of the artistry out of it if we make the process mechanical.
It's a cruel duality. Yes, we're creatives, but we have to get our butt in the chair.
But those are the things that drive us, right? We're here because we love the art. We're not here. Yeah. Well, maybe some people are here because they love the nitty gritty and the grammar and the craft all the time, and that's it. But for most of us, I think we're here for the story, right? And then we do the rest of it because that's what makes our story great.
There you go.
Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.